Hello everyone, this is Papa Smithy, and you're on Thorin's YouTube channel, so brace yourself for some banter.
Right, this is going to be another episode of Thorin's Rotations here. And for this one, it's going to be an LCK episode because unfortunately, I was actually bemoaning this to a wolf through DMs. Like, sadly, this seems like the year where people give the least amount of fucks about LCK, which is bizarre because the whole storyline was supposed to be last year that, like, oh, it's only if they don't win Worlds that they're irrelevant. But, like, as you see now, like, that's irrelevant. They just dumped Worlds, it didn't matter. So we're going to try and bring it back anyway. So my guess for this one, I've got Abaxial here, who people might know. I think I talked to Thorin with a few years back. He's basically better known as a coach in the Brazilian scene, where he's won the championship a few times in CBLoL, and he's been in some of the other regions in different coaching roles. And then we've got Wolf here, who people might actually know better from other games. League of Legends is his background, mainly, I think, obviously of StarCraft classically, and in the more recent times, Overwatch. And if people don't know, one of the ways that Wolf's kind of positioned his career is because he actually is one of the old school people where to go to Korea is like it's the mecca of esports. It's like the place to be, you know, the history to soak it in and all that. He's not one of those guys who just affects that now, where people go, "Oh my god, I love Faker" or whatever. But you know, they found out about esports like 2016. He actually is one of those old school people where, for no joke, like Korea is the spot for him. That's where he's trying to be. So it's funny that if I tried to describe it like you're a bit like Monty, they won't realize, Wolf, you actually were Monty before Monty. Like, you know, like even Monty hadn't figured out that personality type at that point in time. So give us some thoughts here, because the weird thing is, Wolf, people are going to think you're new to esports in the sense that they don't know you from League of Legends, but you've been in the Korean scene super long. So how do you see yourself in the Korean esports scene?
I mean, I'm kind of I joined when StarCraft 2 was booming, so that was the timeline. I came to Korea in 2011. So I saw the rise of popularity of StarCraft 2 outside of Korea, because it was never extremely popular in Korea, but the GSL was, you know, very popular, and there were a lot of pro players who grew up through that circuit because there was a lot of money to be made, even though the viewership wasn't great in Korea. And of course, a lot of people had the opportunity to travel overseas and make even bigger salaries outside of Korea. So I was in that boom, and then League of Legends rose to popularity. Didn't get into that scene, but I followed it quite a lot back then. And if I knew I was going to be a League of Legends commentator in 2021, I would have followed it a lot closer than I did. But I was still super close with the casters out here. You know, Monty and Doa and Papa Smithy later when he came in. I was pretty close with those guys when they were out here. I ended up doing Heroes of the Storm when that game was released in Korea, and then transitioned pretty quickly over to Overwatch. And I've kind of been attached to watching new scenes grow in Korea. That's kind of been my main thing. So this is a pretty big departure for me, because the League of Legends scene in Korea is very old, right? It has like a really, really long history. So for me, like, this is the most unique kind of game jump, I guess you could call, that I've ever done in my career, because I'm coming into a scene that is so developed and so has so much history in it, and so much, it's so rich, right? The Korean scene for League of Legends, that it's pretty strange that someone new like me would come into it.
Sure. I mean, yeah, if people don't know, by the way, not only is Wolf like newer to League of Legends, but the role he's jumping into is basically colour commentator / analyst. I think that might be the most intimidating role swap you can do in all of esports, because in League of Legends, as you said, forget just even like the history. The history of the game is ridiculous. It's like 10 years old. But even worse, the information burden in terms of the number of champions, all the fucking interactions, stuff like, I don't, like, mate, basically in your role, you have to sort of be like, I am the expert, here's what I think about it. But it's pretty challenging. Like, how did you even approach that, man? Like, had you already like been boarding up on it before you got the gig or something? Like, how do you backdoor into that?
I mean, I played the game a lot when it first came out, and actually when I first started playing the game around 2012, I would say it was, like playing it really seriously, thinking about maybe commentating it. There was a rumor that OGN might lose half the rights, and GOM TV might actually get half the rights. But GOM TV never got the rights, and later they were given many, many years later to Spo TV. But there was a rumor going around. So at that time, I thought, well, I might as well give this a go, because I was working at GOM TV at the time on the GSL. And I thought, well, this game is getting very popular. Most people in StarCraft kind of scoffed at League of Legends at the time. Oh, easy game. It's never going to get popular. You know, TeamLiquid.net, hardcore fans.
Yes.
And I thought, well, this game is pretty hardcore. Like, the game kind of reminded me of Brood War. It was really difficult for me. I was like, this is really exciting. I was playing a lot with LS actually at that time.
Sure.
And Brendan Valdez, who's now obviously an LCK commentator himself as well. And I was learning the game and studying the game. Never got an opportunity to cast it. OGN never gave me an offer. I kept doing StarCraft 2. So I kind of dipped away from playing it for a few years. And then a few years ago, around like 2018, 2019, I thought this game is doing very well. I might want to consider commentating it. So I started playing again, learning all the new champions. I started following the LCK very closely again, talking with Papa Smithy a lot about the game, what teams are doing well, and kind of re-engrossed myself that way. And it's been the hardest thing I've ever prepared for, I think, in my whole life. Like, there are some interactions I still don't even know. Like, there'll be times after a broadcast where Brendan will come up to me and be like, by the way, like, you know, that stun doesn't interrupt this ability or whatever, right?
Yes.
For example.
There's a million you have to remember.
It looks like it did, but actually it didn't, just to let you know. And I'm like, okay, that's like one of the million things I don't know.
Sure.
But so I've been focusing mostly on macro, right? Team history, and the draft, right? And statistics. And the more I commentate, the more I learn, because I prepared so much. Like, I don't think I've ever prepared for anything I've worked on in my life this hard before. And I still, on day one, when I first started doing Kespa Cup, I was like, okay, this is harder than I thought. I thought I was ready, but I wasn't ready. And it reminds me when I first started doing Overwatch, I prepared so much. And I'm like, I thought I was ready, but this is so hard. But each and every week I commentate, I start to see and learn things that, like, when you're commentating a game, you learn things and they go through your brain and you actually think about them critically in a quick amount of time. And I feel like for me, that really helps me learn things. And I'm also doing it on the fly. There's a lot of pressure. Like, that pressure helps me learn things. And I think that's one of the reasons why I personally get frustrated when at international events, like, talent from certain regions isn't invited, because they know the game so much better. You can watch a million LCK VODs, right, to prepare for LCK like I have, or to prepare to cast an LCK team in Worlds. But if you are the commentator who's interacted with those teams and has, like, thought about them critically the most, you're going to know those things, like, just so much better. And for me, like, commentating the game has taught me more than what I've spent the last few years trying to prepare for. Like, I feel like I've learned more in the last 3 months than I spent in the last few years trying to get ready.
Sure. I mean, I can definitely relate to what you said at the end there, by the way, because I know from my own experience, whenever I've worked in Counter-Strike, it's the same. Like, it's why I always say, like, I don't care when fans see on Reddit that, like, every pro player claims they watch LCK, because what I always want to know by that is what the fuck do they mean by watch even? Like, first of all, Abaxial is totally right. Most of them are lying, by the way. They just watch, you know, back in the day if KT played T1 in the big game, maybe they watch that one, you know, because it's hype. But even then, when they say watch, they mean, like, second monitor while they're doing something else, you know, like they might be playing solo queue, they might be doing whatever. Like, there's a big difference between actually, like, working the game, analysing the game, and especially if you're actually, like, on the actual match itself. I mean, the contrast I would give, it's a difference between watching a movie or fucking shooting the movie. Like, I'm gonna go ahead and guess the guy who's the director has a way better mind for, you know, what that shot was and what the relevance was. The guy who watched it, let's say if he's a film critic, maybe he did a good job, but, like, it's not going to stick in the same way. So I totally get that part of me. I always do the same thing, basically, where what I do is whenever I'm studying, like, a team that I haven't studied much in Counter-Strike, I just trust that my brain will figure it out. As in, I'll watch a bunch of the demos, I'll do a bunch of the games, and I just think, right, whatever's going to stick there's the reason why it's stuck. Like, I didn't just pull that out of nowhere. But I won't, you know, think, well, what was on page 4 of this? Like, if you go too far like that, you'll just descend into madness, isn't it? Abaxial, where are you at the moment with LCK? Because, like I said in the introduction, dude, this feels like the least fanfare I've ever seen for LCK. Like, bear in mind, they have the world champions. Like, there's actually good reasons even to be very excited about Damwon team this year. But I feel like almost all the fanfare has just been Western regions at the moment. People don't even really care about LPL much. What do you think of where it's at?
Well, I mean, they didn't do any favors killing it off on YouTube.
That's true. That didn't help, for sure.
But no. I think that a lot of new players came into the league, and I think that this is, you know, that's a good thing, not a bad thing. But I think that a lot of the Western fans don't know these players. I don't know, you know, if Wolf wants to comment on sort of like the storytelling around this or whatever. But, like, again, there's just so many new rookies in the league, and I knew, like, a few of these guys from, like, you know, seeing in solo queue and stuff like that. But, like, still, I think most of the Western fans are still, like, you know, stuck with, like, you know, 2017, 2018, maybe at the latest, in terms of, like, oh, who are the big names you should be watching for, all of that stuff. So,
yes,
for whatever reason, I think that a lot of the new players aren't really there in people's heads yet. Outside of that, I think that also the franchising, a lot of, like, the rebranding, I think some of that has also, like, been kind of lost on the West. Like, they don't recognize a lot of the team names. Some of that has been, like, you know, like big names, like rebranding and stuff like that. So, like, you know, Dragon X got, like, new logo, new rebranding, like 3 times over or something like that. There's like Reddit Breon, for example. They were a challenger team before, they got in through franchising, but, like, the Western fans is like, So I think those are both two issues, but they can be overcome with time.
Yeah,
Sure.
I tend to agree. Like, I think that losing YouTube, which is not a decision I have anything to do with. I know
Yeah,
people
of
tweet at me all
course.
the time, like, when are you going to bring back YouTube Wolf? I know it
How
was your
dare you?
decision.
No.
It's gone after you joined, so therefore there's some correlation. But yeah, losing YouTube, I think, pulled away a lot of some of our fans who are in, have less internet. Like, I've heard that people can watch easier on YouTube with better with worse internet connections rather. But I think some of the reasons why the LCK has lost a lot of its hype is when Damwon won, it had been many years since Korea won, and then they won Worlds, and none of the players were on the Samsung roster or Rox Tigers or SK Telecom T1,
Sure.
right? So these are not players that people have been told repeatedly over and over and over again are awesome and are legendary, and Monte Cristo and Papa Smithy are standing on the world's analyst desk saying, like, you should care about these players, right? And most of those, the top Samsung players retired. The Rox Tigers have all split up. Peanut's the only one left. Some of them are going to the analyst desk. Some of them completely retired, going to streaming, stuff like that. So some of the most iconic LCK players are gone now. Wolf retired. Bang went to America for a while. He's back, and it feels like there's not even that much hype around him returning.
No,
because
not really.
because he went back, because he went to America, then he came back, and I was like, well, he went to NA, washed up, he's too old now, and his team isn't doing very well, right? So there's all these like legends that are disappearing from the scene, and right at the same time that you just mentioned, Abaxial, is like, now we have this rebranding. The logo is different, right? The production feels different, right? And because of COVID, we don't even have like an opening video this season. I think that there's a lot of like really unlucky things that are happening around the LCK and its legacy right now all at once that make people just kind of go, well, I'm not that interested, and maybe I'll watch the playoffs later, especially because most of the region feels like it's all in flux. And then like Damwon Kia stands on top of like a bunch of paperweights, it feels like they're so far ahead of everybody else. So I think there's all those factors, and then on top of it all, everybody's talking about LEC. LEC has exploded. Its production is on like another level right now. They just got Cadril as a new caster. This very hype region, so a lot of focus is pulled away from LPL and LCK and focused towards LEC because their production has been really good and their viewership is so high. It feels like everyone's talking about it. If you're like even American, you're like, which one do I watch? Like, which one? If I had to pick between the two, you're like, my friends are talking about LEC. I want to watch it, right? So like, I think all these things are kind of happening at once. And then people are going to, when we hit MSI and Korea does well again, people are going to be like, yeah, I think we should probably go back to watching that one a little bit more. That's my take.
Yeah, the opening video, that one in particular strikes home because like Korea's always had like legendary opening videos for a long time that like, set the bar. This is what every region aspires to. Here in Brazil, we tried to have like, cool openings for our finals, but like a lot of that was inspired by what Korea's doing. Sometimes in China, they would just like directly copy the video, like almost frame for frame. So yeah, we missed that for sure.
All right, let's just start there then, because as you say, Wolf, another thing that I think actually has somewhat killed the hype about this season is there is no true rival to Damwon. Like, Gen.G kept the same team, but Gen.G wasn't really the true rival last year either. Like, they had their issues, The real problem was, like, domestically, it was supposed to be DRX, but DRX, if people don't know, basically split the team. Like, part of them went to Hanwha Life, some of them stayed, basically just PO shit, and then they rebuilt that team around them. So, unfortunately, like, in terms of identities, I do feel like it's a bit lost. Let's just start with Damwon then. So if people didn't watch the region at all, right, obviously the big change was Nagori took the fucking victory lap that you do after you win Worlds and decided to go become a millionaire in China. And so I can't even say the prodigal son returns because Khan has had the most bizarre career of any player I think I've ever seen. Because on the one hand, right, I notice he's almost like, I joke with players like him, he's like the Korean Huni, because obviously Huni is Korean, but hasn't played in LCK properly for so many years. So the reason I say he's the Korean Huni is because people can only mega underrate or mega overrate this player. Like, no one can ever be reasonable with Khan. They're either, when he's on his form, he's so sick, he's the best top laner, which seems like what all the teams think when they sign him, and then it never lives up to that because unfortunately, even though he joins all the orgs that win Worlds, he joins like a year after they win Worlds, and then they don't win with him. So then everyone goes the other way and go, he sucks. It's just like say with Huni, he's just running it down, he's garbage. It's like, well, that clearly can't be the case either. He's clearly a very good player. So this is a player where I feel like I want to get the baggage of all the narratives out of the way. Just actually thought, who is this guy in this year? So, Wolf, what do you think of this player and the new Damwon, the one that didn't win Worlds, the new one we've got for this year, as you say, is so far ahead?
When I saw Damwon win Worlds and I saw those players get up on stage, and I was very excited because I was at that point, I was almost 100% confirmed I was going to be casting LCK, and LCK won, right? So I'm like, okay, this is great for me. Like, I'm about to cast this region. And I saw the players on stage, and I saw, Showmaker is pretty well spoken, and I saw the other players were like shy, but had like a little bit of a very happy demeanor. It felt like when I watched them stand on stage and win worlds, it felt like this team doesn't feel like the Korean villains that you want to beat, right? Like this doesn't feel like the team of like the fans are frustrated because faceless Koreans won again, right? And that was really exciting to me. And I remember Khan, when you see Khan, if you go back and watch the OGN opening videos he's in, for example, he has this like really badass looking persona. He looks really angry. He's often like pictured as a villain, even in those videos. And if you look at what he's done on stream and solo queue and some of the controversies surrounding him as well, you feel like this guy is, he might be like Ash's rival in Pokemon or something like that. Like he's kind of the guy that like, that he's not very friendly, but you're not sure like what you're going to get, but you respect like his skill, right? And then he was a very polarizing player because he either crushed his matchups in the top side or he ended up overextending and losing trying to do so, right? I think that's like what most people feel about Khan. But I was worried he was not going to gel with the team because I thought, oh, this guy might be too like grizzled. He might be too old for these young players. Like he might come into this roster and be like, yo, you guys need to respect me, listen up. Like you don't know what I've seen and like how many places I've been and how many teams I've seen. And I was really worried. I was like, I don't know if he's going to be able to fit with these younger players. I feel like there might be a lot of clashes between the younger players being like, yeah, but he's not as good as he used to be. Why do I have to listen to him? He's like the young, right? He's the older player. He's actually the oldest player in the LCK right now. But what actually happened in reality was that he came into the team extremely funny. He's like a big goofball. He's one of the biggest shot callers on the roster, always keeps the team calm, makes a lot of jokes in and out of game. And he's like, he's the opposite of the villain. Like he's the player who actually has brought so much energy and so much togetherness, I feel like, with this roster. And I see that, and it's really been a shock to me to see that because my expectations were something completely different. And then his play style has been to play weak side top better than anyone else and play Sion better than anyone else and just be unkillable. He very rarely overextends. He very rarely makes mistakes. And I'm like, this is a new Khan and this is a new Damwon Kia. And I almost want to go as far as to say that if it continues at this pace, it might be an upgrade over Nuguri. Like it might actually, at the end result, be like, wow, who would have thought Khan could be an upgrade for Nuguri? And if it keeps continuing like this, I think a lot of people will say that about how this season goes.
What do you think of Abaxial?
I think that's all fair. Certainly, he's not carrying right now, but he doesn't need to because he has like the rest of his team to do that, especially Canyon. I think that at the same time, though, do we trust Khan to carry like when meta shifts or like when team needs him to? Because we haven't really seen that yet. I don't know if I ever 100% trust Khan, even though like he can play all the champions. He can play, even stuff like Fiora if he wants to, all of that. But I'm not sure that, I mean, you say, yes, he's playing weak side, he's playing, more disciplined. But I do think that just like Huni, who you compared him to, he's the kind of guy where when he'll play split pusher, he will not be disagreeable enough. He will not sort of force the team, okay, I'm playing split push, do not fight, do not do something stupid right now.
I see.
So, instead, like, no, I'm playing split pusher, but I will try to TP flank this team fight, or I will try to, do something outside the win condition. And, an important part of being a good player is saying like, okay, this is what I want to do. This is outside of that. Do not do this. Okay, if you did this, we have a problem, stuff like that. So I don't know if I trust Khan to do that if he does have to play carry, but so far he doesn't. So far he plays Orin and Sion.
Sure.
Okay, it works. But I think I still have a question mark on Khan playing carries, even though mechanically, like obviously he can play them.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, if people don't know, just his champion pool alone this split shows that he's definitely like embraced the mindset of what he's supposed to do for this team. Because the other part that I really was shocked when they made this move, like I understood in the past where like FPX got him, for example, their logic was like, if the meta switches, we're fucked out, we can't just play this one style. But the problem is when they brought him into this team, like Nuguri had just shown last year that he could do that supportive style like a motherfucker. He was amazing when he would play like Lulu and garbage like that. So the idea that like that guy looked like he was the absolute best top player in the world. So to me, It's amazing. I agree with you, Wolf. It's not impossible that this team could be as good or better than the last one, which didn't seem possible when they made that move. That looked like an obvious downgrade, like, because you're just going from the de facto best to someone who's a bit more one-dimensional, people thought. Right, what about as a team overall, though? Because the big problem, as we alluded to, is because they don't really have true competition in Korea, we're back in the same position that we were with Damwon last year, where it's like, it doesn't matter if you stomp Korea, because everyone goes, well, who gives a fuck? LPL would beat you, or maybe G2 would beat whoever it might be that they want to pick out. So what do you think of the Damwon team in terms of like, are they the best team in the world, Wolf? Could you make that case for them?
I don't think we can make that case yet, actually. And I know like a lot of LCK fans who will watch this will probably be disappointed by me saying this, but I don't think we can actually definitively say that right now, because there are so many question marks. So China is in a big turmoil about who's going to be the best team there right now. And I look at, G2 and some of the LEC teams, and I'm like, okay, you guys look very good too, but it's a very similar situation over there where the competition is very top heavy. And then, you look at other regions like the LCS, and it's like, well, they're not going to make it into this conversation, sadly. But I look at Damwon, and I worry that with this season of LCK, because there have been so many changes. I mean, Damwon is actually one of the teams with the least changes, right? There's so many teams around them with changes, and Gen.G has also basically no changes. And they're just right below them. They're still crushing Gen.G. I'm like, do you atrophy this year? Especially because we're at a stage where they're so far ahead in spring that I don't know. I mean, if we're talking about Worlds, like I'm really worried about what could happen if the rest of Korea doesn't catch up with them. If we're talking about MSI, like I think there's a better chance for them to continue the domination they had last year. But right now, it's hard for me to definitively say I think this team is the best team in the world, because they are just the king of LCK, which is not extremely competitive at the moment outside of the few top three teams. And it's even hard to now say like who's top three, because DRX is so up and down and inconsistent. And then Hanwha Life has terrible drafts sometimes. And when I see moments like that, I'm like, okay, like, yeah, of course, this very stable Damwon Kia team is going to continue to beat a Hanwha Life Esports and a Gen.G that can't be consistent, and a DRX that has, I mean, you really just have no idea what DRX you're going to see on any given day. They're not even committed. They weren't until today committed, actually, or rather qualified for the playoffs. So, it's like very much like Damwon Kia and then everybody else. And so does that mean they're the best team in the world? Like, I don't think so. I feel like it means LCK is going through a lot of changes right now. Damwon Kia has been pretty consistent. So they are the best in Korea. That much is clear. But how competitive is Korea right now? I feel like we'll have to wait until playoffs to really find out. But another thing to mention is the playoff format has changed. So seeding doesn't matter as extremely much as it did before in Gauntlet. So I think a lot of teams are really experimenting, especially because it's spring, and messing around, because you could just make that run through the playoffs and the bracket's not as cutthroat, where you have to beat like every amazing, awesome team. And then the guy on the finals is just sitting there watching you like, now I've seen all your drafts. Now you have to beat me. So I think people are not as worried about seeding this year.
What do you think?
Good riddance to Gauntlet, by the way. I just strongly dislike that format. I think it's so unfair. But I've played on the other side of that. I've been like, oh yeah, great. Yeah, there goes game one. What do I think? I think if you had Damwon against everyone else right now, just like in a best of 5, I think they'd win. But I think that they do have certainly a lot of vulnerability. And like, even if you just like held MSI right now, which is like, a different thing, you gave all the teams like, a chance to play against each other. Yeah, I think they'd be more vulnerable. I don't know if they'd win that. I think that they have the best understanding of carry jungle right now. I think that the meta suits them very well. But I also see that they go down in a lot of early games. And, it just kind of doesn't matter. Like, oh, Canyon's just going to play Kane, and, he's just going to kind of show up, 10, 15 minutes in, or, get early game farm that he probably shouldn't, because the other teams, don't know how to punish it, that well. I don't think that would fly too well against Chinese teams. I think that, I do think that they have some nice champion pool. They have some some ability to be more flexible with their drafting compared to other teams. Like, they can triple flex Gragas, stuff like that. But overall, I do think Canyon is kind of hard carrying the team. Everyone else is kind of playing sloppy and getting away with it. So I think they're the best, but I don't think, we can really put that much to it. You know what I mean?
I mean, that's one of the things I in general find hard about whenever I see the teams go up against Damwon anyway, is that like the jungle gap seems ridiculous in LCK right now. Like, let's be real. If you just look at the position, it's a position with a lot of newer and like rookie players. It doesn't have like, I know it's mad because like jungle from Korea was always like the best in the world, but actually you could argue there's more good Korean junglers in fucking LPL right now because obviously that league's stacked with talent. So like, I just feel like even the other teams that are good, a lot of them don't have their strongest players at jungle position, unfortunately. And so you already saw last year what Canyon did at Worlds when everything was playing to his strengths. Like, what, Wolf, who would you pick out the other teams? Like, who do you think has the best stylistic chance to beat Damwon? Doesn't have to be Gen.G because the second, obviously.
Stylistically,
yeah,
that's a really tough question. I actually, this is going to sound crazy, but if they played at their best and all the players played up to their potential, maybe T1 actually, but
which version are we talking though? Who would you want in the lineup for that?
I think Oner has to be in the jungle if we're going to have this conversation, and it has to be closer in mid lane, and you have to have a really explosive kind of early game comp and try to get super early, get an early lead, and then just kind of snowball it. Because as Abaxial already mentioned, like there's so many games where Damwon gets behind slightly, and then it just doesn't matter because they win in the late game. When there's some drafts they have where they're like their draft is almost objectively worse than the other team's draft in terms of like late game team fighting, and they're down 3,000 gold, and yet they make crazy macro plays with Khan or Canyon, and then force the enemy team into a position where they don't get to take a fair fight, or they get to the Drake faster, control vision better, and then get to the Drake and then kill the Drake before they get to have that 5v5 team. Like, oh yeah, your team could crush us in a 5v5, but we'll never let you take that. Then sure. they get Baron and then get an inhibitor, and it's like, oh, you just never got to actually take that fight. I think you really have to snowball the game super hard. Gen.G is another one of those teams that that you would think might be one of the teams that could do it because of how relatively consistent they are. But I think it's a really bad matchup for Gen.G into Damwon Kia because, the Scion games we're seeing from Khan, and Khan plays such strong weak side, and the whole game plan for Gen.G is usually give Rascal control of the top side of the map. So it ends up being a mismatch. Mm-hmm. It's like crashing into a brick wall, unfortunately, for Gen.G. So that's why they struggle in the matchup. And teams like DRX, who are up on the top of standings, and Hanwha Life have too many draft problems to actually be the ones to do it. Like their drafts aren't consistent. Pyoshik is always trying to reinvent the meta, even when he doesn't have to, even when there are strong meta picks available. And, DRX's early game is too weak to be able to contend. You look at Hanwha Life Esports, some of their drafts are so weak against even weaker teams that they end up throwing games away they shouldn't. And Damwon Kia is just picking Gragas early before anyone else is and going, well, it could go anywhere. So what are you going to do? Sure. And so I think T1, if they actually could settle on playing Oner and closer, and everyone played their best and no one was tilted and no one was mentally fatigued, like we know everybody is on that roster right now, I think maybe they would be like the one. If I had to pick one, it might be them actually. If they're at their best, right? Like in a theoretical world, because I don't think it's going to be Gen.G, it's not going to be DRX, and it's not going to be Hanwha Life.
No, I don't think it can be any of those teams. I think that all of the mid-range teams in LCK, they're all losing right now because they're all too flawed. They just kind of racked up wins like early in the season by not being dumb or not losing. I actually think like there's two questions in there, who could beat them, but you also very specifically said style. So yes. I actually think that stylistically, I'd rather see like Sandbox in there, even though they're like nowhere even close enough. They're like really outclassed, but like just in terms of having a style, well, they play this top jungle style like maybe better than everyone else right now. They're just kind of a little sketchy everywhere else.
It's all they've got in the team, basically, isn't it? So like what choice?
Yeah, but like that would give them the most opportunity to actually break something open. Even though again, overall like player talent wise, you wouldn't think they could do that. But I don't think like any of the mid-table teams can reasonably challenge Damwon in the playoffs. I think you have to wait. You have to hope one of the lower tier ones improves enough with rookies and stuff like that where they can do it. Maybe DRX, but when we talk about identity, I feel like both DRX and T1 don't actually have identities right now. I think that T1, they've swapped players so much that they can't have an identity, and I think DRX. DRX are better at not losing than actually winning. I feel like, you know,
Yes.
they're one of the teams that will just kind of like get an advantage and then just, you know, walk around the map. And if the enemy team does nothing, okay, they win. But I don't think they're actually a proactive team. I don't think they know how to like, you know, consistently create stuff in best of 5. I mean, not losing is like a good thing. I mean, they, you know, that's how they got to be where they are.
Yeah, for sure.
It's a good starting spot for a coach,
Yeah.
but they do need to learn how to take aggressive action. And I don't think they have an aggressive identity yet. So I can't say they would have something that allows them to beat Damwon and break what makes Damwon good.
I think they're starting to get there a little bit. I think Pioshik is trying to control vision a little bit more aggressively. He's trying to make some proactive plays and catch players out of position. There's been a few games that DRX has they have no right to win this game, right? They're so far behind. Their draft is terrible. And then Pioshik clears some vision, and then they party bush and then kill 3 people, take a Baron and win the game. And I'm like, how does DRX keep getting away with this? But like in a vacuum, right? And in like a perfect world where everyone's playing at their best up to their full potential, like that shouldn't be happening. Those games shouldn't be won by them.
Right.
And I do agree with the lack of identity. I think T1 was almost figuring their identity out. And then they lost a few games in a row. The fans got mad, and who knows what roster we're going to see in their match tomorrow. Like, so like,
yeah, actually, like when you say like, you know, that the fans are like, you know, almost actively destroying it, like, you know, you could see there was a game where they tried to put Closer on Rise, and, you know, he's trying to play sideline, and then, they made a mistake. Enemy team had Rift Herald, and, you know, they just like banged down mid all the way to inhibitor. And like, okay, you know, Rise should be playing sideline. You know, he probably shouldn't have been playing sideline at that moment. But then, you know, you see them the next time they play, and it's just like full ARAM, sideline doesn't exist, you know, just play random, play like NA. And I do think that, yeah, you know, whatever's going on in that team, maybe they've tried to, you know, find identities earlier, but then between lack of results or, you know, internal environments or all of that, it just feels like it's getting destroyed. They're not able to advance what they have. They might even be going backwards right now.
Sure. Yeah, the thing about the T1 move I don't understand is, like, I can see some potential in most of the players. Gumiashi's obviously the one that it just looks obvious that he'll be a very good player, but even the others, like, show games where they look good. I just don't understand. Like, the thing I can't comprehend is what the coach thinks that they're doing with those lineups, because the problem is you're not even, like, A/B testing, because you're putting in totally different lineups. Like, if there was a core concept, everyone, except Kerry, I mean, basically, if there was, like, a concept like this bot lane always plays and we test the mid laners depending on, like, then I'd, like, sort of see, like, right, I can see what they're going for here. This just does look to me like some sort of like as though they think spring split doesn't matter, and they're just cynically like testing all the players as much as possible. Then they can decide later, which is like that. Unfortunately, that will never play well if your reputation is your T1. Like, you're supposed to be the best orgs of all time. You're not supposed to be sort of like, that's the sort of move that like a bottom feeder in LCS would do, and people would like lightly criticize you for, you know.
Yeah, but
Yeah,
even like
you know,
following, I'll go.
go ahead.
Even following that logic doesn't make that much sense to me, like with my coaching philosophy, because you have to give a player time to develop with what you have. And for me, like, the only way to do that is just like give him a full split. You know, don't make him think about like, am I going to play next week or not? You know, all of that. Just like, you know, give him the full split. You know, think more long term, and then you have the information. Okay, you know, either it worked or it didn't, or, you know, this is what we saw from his development and what he was able to do. If you keep swapping players back and forth, you know, put too many variables in it, you put too many question marks on it, and then by the end, I'm not sure you actually have useful information. I mean,
Yeah.
I think that, yeah, you can, if you argue that spring split doesn't matter, okay, that's all the more reason to just say like, okay, pick one guy, stick with it. If it didn't work out, if we made the quote unquote wrong decision, then okay, you know, then we'll change it at the midseason. But yeah, in general, I'm not a very big fan of swapping players in and out. I think when it works, it's more sort of the exception than the rule. It's worked like sometimes before, like for example, TSM did it last year with like Biofrost and Treats. They swapped the player at like the last minute for playoffs, but again, I'm not a fan of it, generally speaking.
Yeah, I mean, if you have a specific strategy you want to use a player for, that's fine too, right? Like if you want to put Teddy on Xayah on red side, which they did like 3 times in a row, I'm like, okay, well that makes sense. Like I can see that. If you're going to go, okay, Teddy's playing Xayah, Gumushi doesn't do that. We know they're going to first pick Kais on blue side. We're going to pick up Xayah as counter. Teddy's going to play it. Fine, that's totally fine. But then they stopped doing that, and what's really weird about this to me, going back to what you were saying as well, like how can you even learn from this? Like it feels like you're putting all this pressure on these players. You are, but they also then didn't play in Kespa Cup. They played their academy roster in Kespa Cup. So if you really want to experiment, if you really want to get the full value out of before summer, before you really start getting those Worlds points and are trying to qualify for Worlds, like why didn't you play in Kespa Cup then? That's super strange that you would not take that huge opportunity to learn and experiment as well in a tournament where you're less likely to be criticized for. In my opinion, T1 fans are crazy aggressive, but I mean, the thing is, like, this goes back to what I was saying before too, when I was like, oh, look at all the great players are retired. If Samsung was still in the league, and hadn't, of course, changed hands to Gen.G, I feel like if the name Samsung was in the tournament, a lot of people would hold them to a higher standard as well.
Sure.
But like T1, even though it's not SK Telecom T1, it's still, T1. So the fans are holding them to this insanely high standard. And then the coaching staff is taking all these risks. So then you get all of that pressure. But then think about this, like your closer, you had a few bad plays on Rise. You had that crazy teleport into the Dragon Pit, which I'm told actually was called by Karya, so it wasn't like his decision, just to put that out there.
Okay.
You have all this pressure on you. You have this game where you follow Flash and you die, and there's all this pressure, and everyone is exploding on the internet. Like, where's Faker? It's Faker. Like, so how could you have all this pressure on yourself before the season even starts? Then you're starting to play over Faker, and then you're messing up some stuff, and everyone's screaming, "Where is Faker?" But the coaching staff isn't going to play Faker, and you've got to actually fill this role against the most famous player of all time. Then you think about like all the expectations people had for Kana, and then Zayas is this new up and coming top tier top laner. So he comes in, he has all these fan expectations. He's not winning, and the fans are like, "Well, maybe he wasn't as good as we thought." You have all this pressure, and then you've got this other guy, Kana, who's had a pretty good season last year. So everyone's like, well, I don't know. Maybe he should be playing Kana. Then you've got Teddy sitting behind Gumayusi. So Gumayusi is this new player who's obviously got a lot of talent, is very good, but it's Teddy who's sitting behind you. Like, it's like the extremely competitive, like every single role is like, it's closer and it's Faker. Like, it's Kana we're talking about, okay? It's Cuz who's the jungle player we're talking about that might replace you. Like, if you mess it up, Cuz is just waiting on the bench. And if you're Cuz, you're like, this new player is waiting on the bench and he's extremely talented. We bought all the best players. And if you mess this up, it could be him next week. And if you have the coaching style that Abaxial talked about, where you just don't do that and you put a player in for the whole split, you get to learn more about that player and not actually make them feel afraid. But if the coach is changing the roster, not even every week, but every match day, like if you have a bad day, how is that? Even if the coach tells you like, oh, it's not because you follow flashed and fed like under turret twice. It's just we were going to play this roster anyways this week. So, like, do you believe that? Like, how can your mentality be correct? How can you actually come into a series, a really important series, actually with a clean mind and trusting your coach who's making all these really aggressive decisions when you have the most rabid fan base ever after you on top of it all, and then Faker is like the one that's going to play if you mess it up. So like. I mean, it's crazy. This situation will probably never happen again.
No. It's probably the most extreme version. Put it this way: normally, when people say we're doing a 10-man roster, that's pretty well known at this point in time. That's like a euphemism for like, I'm just cynically, trying like not to pay someone their full salary, or I'm gonna like replace. I don't want to just put this rookie in on his own. I want to keep this old fucking washed up guy to pretend that he's competing for this. There's normally some bullshit behind it. This actually seems like one of the few times in history I've ever seen someone actually trying a 10-man roster, and if anything, it's a good example of why you don't do it. Like, it's just like it's too many variables, isn't there? Yeah, like literally, it's one of those mad scenarios where even if you pick the wrong player, you might be better just picking two of them to never take out, and just then you'd at least know more, I think, about the parts you're putting in and out in terms of what they're adding and what they're subtracting. So what about this, Abaxial? Like, do you actually think, because that's the weird thing about it, is there are obviously certain lineups they've put in that actually do look pretty good. Like, there are times where you can see why people have some hype for them. Like, do you actually think like this set resolves itself? Like, they figure out a 5-man core, as we've been sort of bemoaning earlier. To be fair, the top half of the league's pretty weak. Like, if you got the right team together and the right run, you could definitely be a playoff team that could make noise potentially. What do you think the future for this T1 team is?
I think put in Teddy, put in closer. I do like Honor and Zeus. And then, I think just if you pick one team, stick to it, they can be good. I think they have like certain issues they need to work out. Like, for instance, Karya, who has been a constant on the roster, he like never goes mid. And they make it worse by picking like either Senna Tam Kench, which, switches which guy controls vision, or they pick Yuumi, which also doesn't roam mid very much. But closer like flashes forward like level 3 and all that stuff. and tries to kill his opponent in lane. But he doesn't have much synergy with either jungler because they're switching them in and out. And then support never goes mid as well. And well, coaching staff is playing closer, so apparently they're on board with him, trying to solo kill the opponent.
Sure.
But if you have that style, then maybe you should actually play around it. If they actually start playing around closer, then yeah, I think they can be a good team. But they have to actually start using their pieces properly. I think that Teddy still has it, and he has. I prefer Teddy over Gumeyusi right now because Teddy has better wave control in lane. Sort of small micro decisions. Where the next wave is going to meet, all that stuff. I think he does a better job. Gumeyusi will throw away the ability to contest the wave and stuff like that more often. So I would rather stick with Teddy. But again, they have good players. They can do that roster I just said, or they can do a few other different ones. Mostly just do play around mid lane. Regardless of whether you play Faker or closer, get carry moving towards mid. Jesus Christ, they don't play around mid. And any team that doesn't play around mid is always going to be very fragile, always going to have a very gaping flaw in how they play. It's why do you can't even make any argument for closer over Faker if you're not going to play around mid, because even if Faker is legendarily very demanding, he does know how to play without resources, believe it or not.
Sure.
Whereas closer definitely doesn't. Closer is still very new to the game, so you should probably help him a little bit. So I think they can be good.
I generally agree with everything you just said, and one of the reasons I think a lot of people want to see Faker back in is they want to remind themselves as where T1 is at right now. I think a lot of people are just extremely Faker fanboy fans, and they want to see Faker no matter what. But a lot of people, even myself included, my interest in seeing Faker is to see how the team operates differently with him, because it feels like it's been so long since we've actually seen that. And obviously Wunner has been a very aggressive jungler that I think does pair well with the style of closer. But then they're putting closer on control mages and putting him on Seraphine, and I'm well, this isn't working. What's your plan? You have to understand, I think, if you're T1's coaching staff, why are you playing closer over Faker? If you're going back to what he just said, if you're not going to give him the resources to actually pop off in mid and carry mid, then why are you picking him over Faker, who's extremely talented and good at playing by himself in mid? If carry is not going to come there, or if Wunner is not going to put his focus in mid, he's going to put his focus topside more often than not. Then what are we doing? Then okay, fine. Then don't put closer on Aurelio while you're going to do that. Put him on something else. It really feels like T1 has all the pieces, but they don't work well together because there's so much pressure. It feels like so often I'm watching closer trying to prove something rather than trying to win the game. You know what I mean? That flash, that follow flash I was talking about, the flash you were talking about earlier. I think we both know that moment, right, with the Aurelio, where it's are you trying to, you got his flash and you were already extremely ahead. Are you trying to be the number one clip on Inven today, or are you trying to win this game, right? So those are the kind of things that, these superstar, rising star players that they theoretically will become, right, if they can close all these issues up, need to grow through. There's a lot of growing pains on the team right now with a completely new coaching staff, right? This roster is so different than Damwon Kia's roster last year that, the coaching staff has moved over to. So, it's a completely different environment. Everyone has to adjust. And the coach is a very last-minute decision as well. There's a lot of controversy around that. Whatever, you can believe whatever you want out there, but, those are definitely a very last-minute decision. So I think there's a lot of growing pains that have been, exacerbated by frustrated fans. And this is just one of those unforgettable seasons for T1, not because they're good, though.
If we talk a bit now about Gen.G, right, this is a team where, I have to say it, this is why I don't totally blame some of the Western fans who are a little bit out on Korea at the moment, because the thing with Korea, supposedly in history, is you're supposed to be able to just point to the top end and say, fuck the rest of the table, just look at the top 3 teams, well, put them against any region in the world, look, this guy's amazing. In fact, usually that's how you even trash talk, you just say, look, the second best Korean team would dust off all the Western teams or whatever. The problem I have is, if Gen.G in the standings is the second best, I can't even believe that myself, because the problem I have with this team is, because even last year, like, dude, they were in the final, obviously, if you go back like a year or so. But the problem was that was the team where there was always, like, they were always lacking that last extra gear. Like, they had, like, everything in the team looks decent, like, all pretty good players. Like, they're all, like, mostly some of the best players at their roles. Like, BDD literally is like a person who apparently was made to win the Player of the Game award the way that they voted in Korea. Like, his entire fucking play style, like, if you win the game, he wins that award every time because how the team plays to him. So everything's looking good, right? But they never quite were, like, world beater for me. And so then I look in the off season. Where are the fucking signings with the same team again? This is one area, Wolf, where I feel like a lot of Westerners won't get this. It's one thing that on the one hand I actually admire about Koreans, but I also really dislike, which is Koreans aren't trolling in an interview where you'll see, like, you know, Prime Faker back in the day when he was, like, absolutely the best player. If he loses the game in the interview, he'll make it sound like it's a 1v1 game and he fucked up. You know, he'll be like, you know, there's more I could have done, or maybe I made a mistake. And as a Westerner, you just think, like, dude, what are you talking about? Like, you're the best. Like, you can lose the game. But on the other hand, I admire the idea of, like, is there anything else I could have done? You know, is there, like, even a tiny way I could have improved? The problem with that thinking, though, is I also do think sometimes when they do it with their players, they act as though every player is like an unfinished project who can still max out to 100% like ability level. And so it means that you will stick with players and lineups for years longer, thinking it's like, you know, well, we're going to put more time in and more effort. And it's like, that's all well and good, but, like, sometimes, like, you're just never going to become, like, up 1.5 times better. Like, you've seen, like, for me, this lineup's run its course. Even the signing, if people don't know, because I know a little bit about the LPL from back in the day, even the signing of the jungler makes no fucking sense at all, adding Flawless. Because if people don't know, Flawless actually did replace Clid back in the day on Jingdong, and he's basically just a worse version of him. They're like mechanical junglers who used to just be piloted by fucking Doinby or whatever. Like, so I don't even get that move, because it's not like you've done the old classic, you know, like, I'm going to take the tank jungler to go alongside the mechanical jungler, then I can swap out. It's like, you've got two of the same player there. So for me, I don't get the Gen.G project at all. Like, I get that it's a good enough team, but for me, it's a team it's just destined to come second and third. Like, I can't ever see how they win. So, have you got different hopes than me here, Wolf? Have you got some reason to believe in Gen.G? Come on.
I mean, it's a team that really reminds me of, you know, if I could make an Overwatch reference, Kongdu Panthera, like, always second, like, never able to quite make it. Like, they were always a really good team, and they didn't change their roster too much until, of course, it was bought out by London Spitfire, and all those good players went away. It's like this. It's this team where I do kind of agree with your take that they want to see, like, no, we're almost there. Like, if we can actually just play a little bit better, then we'll get there. It does feel that way. They signed Birdall, who's a really strong top prospect, but, like, Rascal's one of their best players, and they do everything they do in their drafts around Rascal. So, like, I'm like, it's hard for me to be excited about Birdall when he hasn't been played yet, and all of their drafts are literally focused around Rascal. So, like, I'm like, well, it doesn't seem like you guys have any option of developing or any interest in developing this player anytime soon, right? He wasn't allowed to be played until the second round robin, but he still hasn't been played yet. I think that there's something going on in the team where maybe the players are burnt out. I don't know exactly how their practice is going or, like, what their scrim blocks are like, but it feels like the team is super burnt out and they're not really trying very many new ideas, and their drafts look really similar every time. You know what you're going to get when you see a Gen.G draft. I think you see, like, the Renekton ban and the Camille ban in the first phase, and you're like, our Rascal can't play this. And then Rascal's like, I wish they left those open. And he ends up doing fine. He'll play a Gnar or something, and it'll be okay, but he doesn't get to play his play style. If Gen.G is, if this is going to sound weird, but it feels like Gen.G's team is very bored. And you could almost see it in some of the champion picks at life picks on the bottom lane where you're like, I don't know if this is good, but I mean, it's fun, I guess, right? Like, when you pick up a lot of Jarvan on the bottom side of the map, very hit or miss. And in BDD was the player that was most hyped to me by, you know, some of the Gen.G coaching staff I talked to before the season started. Everyone's like, oh, he's looking so good in scrims. Like, it's control mage meta. He's so good at this. Like, he's going to kill it. But he's been fairly mediocre, like, overall. Like, I mean, compared to what we expect from him, right? I mean, as a player, he's very, very strong. But, like, compared to, like, how well he was touted to me by everyone and how well he's played in previous years, I'm like, he's still at the same place. Like, he hasn't grown. And this team just remains static. And I don't know if they can make any major changes right now, like, because they've committed so much to this roster and they've got so many personalities on it. It's almost like you have to smash the whole thing and start over. It's hard to replace pieces. So I'm worried about them for the rest of this year if they can't break through this slump of just not improving. Because, you know, if you don't do well at MSI, if you don't even go to MSI, then you stay together and you either go to Worlds and get stomped again. You know, you beat some of the weaker teams, but you don't go to the finals. You don't do very well. You just come back. Like, how can those players stay motivated, right? I think at some point you do have to smash the whole thing and start over.
Yes. What do you think of Abaxial?
Yeah. I agree. I think they need like, a change. And if it needs to be like a big change, then do it. Because I think as they are, I'm not even sure like they can get to the finals as they are. Again, like I think that another team can improve more. Another team can, have a better stylistic matchup, all that stuff. I think that right now, Gen.G, like if Rascal doesn't get ahead, actually he's kind of useless. I think that he's actually looking almost as much of a weakness as a strength right now. I just don't see them improving that much. It seems very linear around top jungle. Sometimes they can have good team fighting later in the game because they have experienced players, but they don't look like a championship team. I'm not even I depends on everyone else, but I actually don't think they'll make finals.
Right, the one team that I find actually really interesting, I wanted to know actually, especially when people watch more games, is the Hanwha Life team, because this is the one where like without going into a massive tangent, basically whatever the fuck actually did happen between CV Max and those Griffin players 2 years ago, does the ripple ever end? Does it ever end? That ripple is still going across the pond, fucking up more rosters. It just never ends. The impact of that butterfly effect scenario. Because if people don't know, obviously then some of them left and went to DRX, which is where CV Max went. And then after that they left DRX, and the CV Max is technically on the DRX team, but he's inactive because of the suspension. The whole thing's super complicated. But as a result, unfortunately, what it meant was you had that amazing Griffin team a few years back who had, that amazing ceiling, but they never really reached it. And then each of the teams since then is just a sort of slightly weaker version of that, but still with some brilliant players. Obviously, who the fuck doesn't like Deft and Chovy? They're a banger players, but you got to have more than that in a team. And for me, every team they had after Griffin was just, it always had flaws even in the lineup. And then you could see that then they'd have to draft in some fucked up way to make it work in some weird context. The one they had last year was one of the weirdest I've ever seen from the team, because if people only saw Worlds, they didn't play anything like they did in Korea, like they did at Worlds. They almost played an opposite style there. So I don't know where to come down this Hanwha Life team, because listen, Chovy is still a great player. Deft still has something left in the tank. Abaxial, start me off on this one, because on the one hand, I can see why there's some things to like about them, but I'm not really in on this team. I find it a bit of a weird composition of a team,
Yeah, I think the first game I was watching, I their top laner watched the other top laner drop a ward. And then 30 seconds later, their jungler walks over that ward. It's dude, you watched him. I don't know. I think the sport's decent, but I think overall they don't have it, and they draft really weird. Them and Brian are the two teams that I think really ardent draft the most. I don't know. They just I think they don't have good fundamentals. Particularly on top side, but just overall as a team, it's kind of hard to say more than that. I don't find them very interesting to watch.
I feel like for me, I've always been intrigued by them, especially because Hanwha Life has historically been a very weak team. This is they're the best they've ever done, basically. Once you put this roster together, right? And this is a team that has some really top talent on it, in Chovy and in Deft, obviously. And then Vista is a pretty decent support that kind of glues that bottom side of the bottom trio together. But then you have Arthur, who's from, actually most people don't know this, but he's actually from the OPL. He's an Australian Korean player, right? He actually played in Australia, and he came back, and that's such a weird signing, right? For a team, it's okay, so we got Chovy, so we got Deft, but also we got an OPL player. We got an Oceania player. So I think for me, I was always really excited to watch Arthur. And then he started off great at the beginning of the season. And then he had a few rough games. And then they put Johan in. Johan's fundamentals have seemed really bad in terms of the games he's played recently. It almost feels like they're playing him just to see what happens. And now I'm Chovy he wins every time. He's up 100 CS almost every game. He wins lane in matchups he shouldn't win, and then Deft does fine. And if they're winning, Deft gets to play the game and he crushes and he carries the game and it's beautiful. And Chovy's side laning and it's okay, this is it. DRX, say goodbye. Gen.G, no way. It's Hanwha Life. Maybe they're the one that's going to the finals. And then Morgan just makes a mechanical error in the top side and dies, or rotates too slowly, teleports too slowly, and then Chovy dies, and then the team that they're playing against beats them because they're also playing with a subpar draft because their drafting is weird. And you're like, oh, this team has so much potential. And you watch Chovy, like, why did they put him in this matchup in mid? And he's up 20 CS, but he still can't win the game. It's just so frustrating.
Yeah, no, I don't know. I think Johan has so little pressure on lanes. Like, I mean, Deft like kind of ints the laning phase and dies to ganks a lot. But like, okay, if you know that's your style, maybe like Johan can like adjust and like play around that and like cover bot line. But he just doesn't cover bot. He just doesn't cover lanes. I don't know. Like, I mean, obviously, like this meta, yes, it's power farm, yes, it's carry jungler, but like still, like you can still cover lanes. You can still find time to gank and be effective. That's what good junglers do, and like he's kind of invisible for me. So yeah.
Deft, I mean, he definitely still has like his moments, right, where you look like, okay, his positioning is so good, his decision making is so good, but he has died isolated in the 2v2, even without ganks, right, so many times where he actually just takes a bad trade and walks into an Alistar, and you're like, well, you just die here, actually. Like, you misjudged the damage, right? It's like he's trying to play a champion from its like 2016 state and not its current state, you know what I mean, in terms of like the damage numbers.
He thinks he can auto space everything.
Yeah, exactly. So like, I don't know. I have high hopes for this team in general, or I had high hopes for this team in general, but recently they've kind of shown me that either they don't understand draft or they really want to experiment a lot. Like they put Chovy on Lilia mid recently, which was really cool and it was really fun. I think that was against Nongshim and they crushed it and they won. And it's like, okay, well, you were going to win that one anyways. But like, then I watched them play like 2 back-to-back like all AD comps where like Chovy's playing Sion mid. And I'm like, oh, your opponent's team just counters that with armor. And like, what was your game plan? It feels like the last lock-in on whenever I feel like I see a weak Hanwha Life draft, like the last lock-in comes through. And it's like at the last second to it, it clearly wasn't a plan. And they're like, we'll pick this one, I guess. And you can see look on the player's face where they're like, you can like see them sit back in the chair, and I'm like, oh, this was not planned. Like this is not some stick strategy, This is kind of like, oh, I think we lost draft. I feel like I've been way less impressed by them recently than I was at the beginning of the season, and I don't know if it's experimentation because the gauntlet format is gone and your seeding doesn't matter as much, and they're not. I don't think they're actually necessarily secured playoffs. I'd have to check. I don't think they are technically right now. But like they're probably going to make playoffs almost no matter what. So I could see like second round robin, you don't care as much, but like it's time to tighten up if you want to have a chance of making the finals, because I just don't see it. I mean, I know you said you didn't think Gen.G was going to do it. I put Gen.G above them at the moment. Like right now, Hanwha Life is not clean enough.
No, the other thing that kills me about this team as well is like, at this point in time, right, I know everyone who's a Chovy fan. Like, listen, I was a massive fan of Frogger back in the day, so I can't talk shit on this. Like, they are just basically counting CS numbers, going, look, but he won in CS, and then what you do is you go, the rest of the team sucks anyway, so the rest of the match didn't count. That was like the true, like, 1v1 part of the game. But the problem with that is this team looks like the worst example of that I've ever seen from Chovy, because individually, if I isolate him as only a mid laner, yeah, he's always one of the best in the world. Like, he's always in contention, usually for best in the world. He has a million fucking champions, plays all these matchups, he always has good CS. The problem I have is this. He's now been in 3 completely different teams where the same story plays out every time, which is like all his fans, like he's a genius who his team just doesn't know how to use him. It's like, brother, at some point in time, either a coach, your teammates, you have to be able to explain to them how to use you. Because one thing I don't actually like about Chovy's game in that sense is I've seen too many times where it does look like he's doing awesome individually, but either his team doesn't know what to do with it, or I have to speculate at this point in time, 3 different teams, or he doesn't know. Like, maybe in solo queue when everyone's playing for themselves, maybe that works. But in some of these team games, like even some of the picks, like that Sion pick, mate, I still don't understand what that draft was. Like, who was going to win the team fights? Like, what? Sion, and that's like your best player in the whole server. In theory, if you're Hanwha, like the one thing you can say every game is if we give Chovy the right matchup, we have a chance. Like that game's like one where I don't even understand the comp. So like, give me some thoughts as a coach here, Abaxial, because on the one hand, I can acknowledge he's clearly a very talented player, but I also feel like I always think if you're going to be a superstar player, especially if you want to be selfish, you want your picks, you want things your way, you have to be able to explain to people how to use you. Like at the point in the game where I'm the strongest. Now, listen to me, I'll tell you which lane I need to go to, where we need to play, when we need to fight around me. Because if you don't do that, like, yeah, you can say it's your coach's fault, but it's also on you as well if you want to be a superstar player, in my opinion.
Yeah, no, that's all completely fair. I think that if you want to be the best as opposed to like be good, you have to, know the team game in and out. You have to know like what your teammates should be doing at all times because you have to understand your relationship to them. And so like, yeah, Chovy doesn't really, roam that well or like, use his pressure for the rest of the team. Okay, why? Is his jungler incapable of listening to him or does he simply not say? Well, there's a couple of possibilities within that, but it's not that complicated. There has to be a weak link somewhere in there. And it can be Chovy himself. It could be that, yes, guy's a genius 1v1, can beat almost anyone, but doesn't know what to do with it. That is entirely possible.
Because I know, just before fans just naively get this wrong, like, the key thing to remember with all games, especially a game that's as information, like, the burden is so insane, like League of Legends, it's not a linear game. You don't just, like, learn, like, right, well, look, he's this good, so he must know everything in these areas. Like, no, maybe his skill set is more tailored, or maybe the teams he was in didn't coach that way, or that's not even the vision he has of the game, like that's why I say, to me, I wonder how much of it's, like, solo queue stuff, because obviously in solo queue, he's, like permanently a fucking god, apparently, if you ever follow the Korean solo queue ladder,
Yeah, he is, which does, kind of make it odd because, yeah, you keep hearing that thing from various people within Korea, like, oh, if you want to be good, you have to, like, play every role in solo queue. You have to, like, have a strong understanding of that. Like, I think one of the earliest examples I can remember was, like, Mata. He had, like, supposedly, like, all 5 different accounts, one for each role and stuff like that. But so, like, yeah, I do think there's some truth to that because ultimately, like, if I'm going to understand, like, okay, if I roam now, it allows the bot lane to do this. If I, place vision here, it allows my teammate to do this. If I go in right now, I, like, mess with this guy so that he can't roam. I'm trying to do something for the team. Maybe I do something that's not so good for me, but I'm going to do it for the team because I know that's going to pay off later in the game. And maybe Chovy can't think like that. Yeah. It is like that.
I mean, and a lot of that's on the coaching staff too, or on his team to give him ideas. Like, there's a player in StarCraft. He was a Brood War player very briefly. Played in like the last OSL and came into StarCraft 2. You might have heard of him. Innovation. He was a mechanical god. His APM, his ability to macro was so good that he was extremely dominant player in his top era of StarCraft 2. He's still fairly decent today. But he would always have more units than everybody else because he macroed so well. You'd have more Marines, more Marauders, more Medevacs. And it was just like this endless stream of Terran units killing everything. But then he had like a bit of a slump at times when if he ever got behind or if someone messed with his build and he couldn't actually get those units out like as quickly as he could. It'd be like if a speedrunner gets to a point where they mess up too many steps, they just reset because like, oh, I can't get to the pace of the game where I'm supposed to. Like he would struggle to figure out how to transition so many times. And then he joined, SK Telecom's Pro League team. I don't know if it was Coach Park or if it was Uwe at the time who was coaching that team for StarCraft 2, but whoever the main coach was, ended up turning him into an extremely versatile player because up until that moment, he just was macro, just shit out units and like, I'm going to kill you. And then he would get behind and it would be like, the fans would be like, well, what's going on? Like, why is he failing here? Like he's not that far behind, like, but he doesn't know what to do. He's not dropping. He always drops, but he's not sending drop ships. Like what's going on? And I feel like he was a player who needed someone to coach him how to play from behind and how to adapt his builds and actually how to transition in games where he wanted to do a CC first, but then he got cheesed, and then he had to cancel his CC. And how does he transition and get that speed up going again? Get his production back going and actually start doing some harassment on the map instead of just streaming units. And I think that Chovy is a really similar case in terms of like in this very micro situation where he's actually playing against minions and one other player in the lane in an isolated case and just never losing and never messing that up. There are ways to like improve on what he could do elsewhere on the map. I don't want to say his decision making is bad by any means, but like he's not getting enough out of his team, and it's not just necessarily him, but the team isn't utilizing him properly, and like that's probably just a coaching error, or the coaches haven't necessarily realized that that's an issue. Because it's hard to even say like we need to do more for Chovy when you look at his stats, right? Like who's the guy who's going to stand up, in the coach meeting and be like, I don't know if Chovy's actually, if we're doing enough with this guy. Like, well, I don't know, wasn't he up 120 CS and like he had the most damage in the game and like he had the biggest gold lead? Like, who's going to be that guy to stand up and say that?
I'm not even sure they even think about it because, like, again, like if they don't realize that, maybe our strong players should help, the weaker players on the team, then why do you put them on Aatrox? Okay, like you're just going to AFK for 15, 20 minutes, just like not lose. Okay, it doesn't even seem like they're thinking like, oh, maybe Chovy, should get pressure and then, help us, get the push somewhere else. Seems like a, foreign concept or something like that. Or Scion for that matter, which, actually
Sure.
Scion can roam, but still he didn't do very much of that game either. So
No.
By the way, on the topic though of off-season moves and bringing in rookies and stuff, this is also the reason, in my opinion, that T1 has looked a little bit silly this split, is because it's all well and good if they could have fallen back on the angle of we're using a lot of rookies. It's so's DRX and no one even fucking knew these guys. At least some of your rookies were touted. People knew Gumayusi's coming. Nobody knew. These guys from the DRX Academy, dude. If you told me that Chovy and Deft leave that team, they don't have a coach anymore. I'm going to go ahead and say, well, that's not a playoff team. It's probably going to be bottom of the fucking whole LCK, probably maybe even be terrible, and that might just be the end of that project. Maybe it just spirals out and becomes the worst. They're playing so above beyond the level I would have possibly thought imaginable without bringing in big names. It's unbelievable. Give me some thoughts, Wolf. What do you think of DRX? Because I actually, like I said, I had no expectations for this team at all.
I mean, I had no expectations either. They were definitely towards the bottom of my power rankings. I even had in my brain, I was okay, Sandbox is going to be way better than this team. That's where I had them in my mind. And then we saw Kespa Cup and it looked pretty weak. It was not great. It was not terrible, but I was well, I mean, this is about what we expected, right? There's a lot of room to grow. We'll see what happens. Then we go in and it's okay, Pioshik is the one you expect to crush and do extremely well. And he does well. He does fine. But the rest of the team kind of grew up around him, and Kingin suddenly became the first player in Korea to be successful on Nara in this meta, and many players followed, of course. But Kingin was the first player where we were oh, I think he actually broke the losing streak. It was oh, Nara is 0-6, 0-7, and then Kingin actually has this fantastic game, is hitting stuns left and right, is entering team fights at the right angle, and actually being extremely impactful. And until that moment, Nara was looking terrible, and Kingin has been very good. Bao and Becca on the bottom side of the map have looked really versatile across a lot of different champions. I think Bao is super underrated as an AD carry right now in terms of how much damage he's putting off in team fights, his positioning. And this team is filled with rookies and is a little bit odd, but there were signs, right, of Kingin being good in the past. There were signs of Solka because he used to be quad. For those watching, remember that player, he was a substitute.
Yes.
There were signs that okay, this team has a lot of potential, but I don't think anyone was ready to believe them. And then the further issue is why people still don't believe them is they keep winning games they shouldn't, with drafts that don't make sense, or games where they're 5,000 gold behind and they win a few team fights at 37 minutes into the game and they just take a Baron and win the game, like I was saying before. So on the eye test, I feel they're better than expectations, but I still don't trust them. I'm I don't know. Do I want to say this team is top 3? This, even when they're in top 3 in the standings, I'm the standings say they're top 3, but I don't believe it. I don't know if I trust that.
Yeah, like I said earlier, they're better at not losing than winning. I do think that again, that's a good thing to have, and it's almost they have a bit of the luck. But luck is actually a very important thing to have. You know what I mean?
Of course, yeah.
They're like that. I think that they do have a respectable top jungle synergy. I think that they can move around the map. But yeah, I mean, ultimately, all you can say is that this is above expectations for a rookie team to be that good and be that disciplined. Really. Most rookie teams are not very disciplined, and they actually show that really well. So if they can continue to, get more aggressive, be more proactive on the map, find ways to, again, like I said, I don't think they know how to break something what a team like Damwon does. But if they can continue to, find new stuff about the game, they can be good for sure. This is certainly a good result for the coaching staff, whoever is in charge of them right now, whether it's CV Max or behind the scenes or Edgar. It's Edgar, they right?
Song.
Yeah.
Oh, Song?
That's right.
Okay. But whoever's
Song,
in charge of them is, I think he's doing a good job.
Sure.
This is certainly an excellent result for a 4-rookie team roster.
By the way, that if you ever needed proof of how different cultures are and how you can't just copy and paste a coach from Korea, how about Song going to the LCS, being basically considered a joke for 3 years? He was just literally coaching fucking CLG. Then when he comes back to Korea, he takes a bunch of rookies and he has them top 3 in the fucking league. That just shows you how you can't just take people and just chuck them in another because what I always say in that scenario, Wolf, it's one reason why I found it so weird that Americans thought they could just hire the Korean coaches. He's not coaching Koreans though. Like, like this is, where's his strength going to apply? Like, listen, the game knowledge and stuff can all be great, but like interpersonal stuff is like part of what coaching is. Like, I always found it so weird. They thought like a Korean coach would automatically be able to like train a foreigner, for example. Like, to me, that's such a weird premise to even imagine would work.
Yeah, it is a weird thing. And like, even on the reverse side, like, I think generally speaking, when Yamato came over here and did coaching in Korea, like people respected his work ethic and what he did, but like I don't think we'll ever know. And I think probably Yamato would even say like he probably could have reached his full potential if everyone spoke fluent English, but they didn't, or if the culture was different, right? Like,
yes.
I mean, I think like the same rules apply both ways, and so it's really hard to see players reach their full potential when they travel overseas. And when coaches travel overseas, it's the same thing. And like, I mean, I come from an Overwatch background, right? And this happened so much, right? Where at the beginning of Overwatch, it felt like most of the teams were like full Korean, but then it felt like, well, look at all these free agents. We could just get one, and then we'll just win, right? Because we have the best Gen.G player, or we have the best Brigitte player, or we have the best off tank. And it just never worked out. And then like everyone and all the analysts and all the fans were like, it's so weird because he was so good in Korea, but now it feels like he's just not as good anymore. And I'm like, well, there are actually 5 other people on the team. It's not just him, right?
Sure.
And like there is a completely different coaching staff, and like a lot of Korean players get extremely frustrated. I know it's been discussed to death on a lot of your content as well, Thorin, but a lot of Korean players get frustrated when they go to the West because they're like, oh, well, these guys just don't practice as hard. This is so confusing to me. But the same thing could be said for coaches. When a coach goes over to the West, they're like, well, how do I convince these players they need to play way more hours because they don't want to listen to me because they think it's not important? There's so many cultural differences that go alongside that, and I know we're getting a little bit off track, but yeah, it's definitely something people need to think about more. And it's appalling that like this still continues to happen today. Like this has been happening for 10 years, and it still continues to happen today.
The NA culture thing is a tough nut to crack. Even like we have such a good crop of imports in NA, and they're all of them are like, Jesus, what is going on here? Even people like Alfari and Perks, they're like,
Sure. Yeah. I also just think it's like, again, just to wrap up the tangent, the weird thing about that whole approach as well is like, I wish people would stop, not just fans, people even in the industry, acting like knowledge and understanding of any craft is just linear. Like, I don't know why they do it, because what they act like is, right, well, if you're super smart and you won in Korea with this team, come and coach my team in America. It's like, well, again, where's the connection there? Like what toolkit was I working with? What's my style? Like, funny thing is though, like, I guess I can't blame it on esports, because if it's a general problem in sports in general, like you see teams all the time who they might be like a massive NFL franchise and they sign like, a defensive coach for a team with no good defensive players. Like, the people do mistakes like this all the time. Like it's where like narrative thinking just fails, unfortunately. Like you can't really do it with a wide skill set like that. Because I always feel like, especially in Korea, like in Korea, you also, it looks to me like one of the few areas where both, because I noticed this with the star players, like with people like the aforementioned Chovy, it almost feels like in the off season when you make your moves, whereas in the West, you would make your move like, right, well, if I join, you're going to get player Y and Z, and if they're not coming, then I'm not joining. Like, I'm pretty sure that's what someone like Perks was saying, like, he wasn't just saying, yeah, okay, if you pay the money, I'll join, and then whoever you happen to put next to me, I'll just trust that that's good. Like, in Korea, it feels like coaches and star players join teams where it's like, right, so I've got my deal done, who am I playing with? And they're like, oh, we've got this guy called Morgan for you, and you're like, hope it works out. Like, you know what I mean? Like, to me, it's alien, because like, if I'm like Chovy or Faker or Deft or something, I'm only signing because you've got me like the team that can win now, or if I'm a coach, I've got the players that can win now. I don't just have a random smattering of rookies, but I think that's one of the areas in Korea that's really weird, because if you notice, in Korea, aside from like people like T1 trying to sign whoever they think the best coach is, which they've done a few times, people just seem to stay on the same team for a long time, and they don't almost have like the same, like almost free agent battle for all the coaches and stuff. People just stay with their squad, and then they bring in a player this year, and then take out a player, and it's more like a long-term project, it feels like. So I think their vision on coaching is just totally different to what we have in the West.
I think that to talk about that topic for just a second, I think the two main reasons, like for example, the main reason why people stay with teams for a long time, whether it's players or coaches, is there's this loyalty aspect that exists in Korean esports that is cultural, that doesn't exist in the West as much, right? And that's something, Faker said 100,000 times, it feels like, across interviews, like, yeah, I had so many offers, but I wanted to stay with this team. This is my org, right? And, now obviously he's even like involved in the org as he is as a player. But like that's one of the reasons why you see that. But I think part of the reason why you see these mishmash, like, how did Chovy end up with this weird team, and like, did he even know Def was going to be there in the first place?
Yes.
Is because like this actually goes back to StarCraft Pro League, which is a Brood War tournament, which is basically the first franchised esports league. People are like, ooh, franchising, we're doing that now. Like esports is getting big. This has been going on for like a really long time. And Kespa had a franchise league called Pro League, and they had free agency, and player trades happened all the time. There wasn't like a draft, but they're basically every player had a free agency date. They became free agency, or they got free agency. Every team knew about that, and they would make offers, and these players would end up joining teams. And Korea really honors the like free agency system, and they always have. So it's kind of like, if you're a player, usually you get to choose like whether you want to accept the offer or not, right? And trades do happen, but like you go, when a team says, "Hey, would you like to pay for this much money?" You don't ask questions of like, "Well, who am I going to be playing with?" I mean, I'm sure some do, but in general, it feels like the Korean system does honor that sort of free agency idea of like, I'm going to purchase this player if he accepts. We're going, and that's like how it goes. Whereas in the West, a lot of big egos, a lot of big personalities are like, well, if you want me, you have to bring everything that comes with me, and
Sure.
I feel like that happens a lot less here.
Well, here's a question, because I actually wouldn't know too much about this. Would you say that players also re-sign from free agency more in Korea? Like, okay, I'm going to be a free agent from this team. Like, we didn't re-sign before the period, but I listened to the other offers, and you know what? I decided to re-sign, like a week after, becoming a free agent or something like that. Would you say that happens more often in Korea?
Historically speaking, yes. I feel like recently, especially going into like this season, we've had like some of the biggest changes we've ever had across the board. But just generally, yes. I think historically, yes. And I think a lot of people, one of the big reasons why this happens, like one of the things this goes back to is like the same sort of reasons we were talking about before about coaches, and like the young mentality is like a lot of players trust their coaches in Korea because they're older. A lot of them have a lot of experience. Like a lot of the time you'll have a new player coming into a roster. The coach has been coaching for like 4 years. Even if he hasn't coached on successful teams, you're like, I know this guy knows what he's doing, or you kind of trust in that. And it's kind of against the culture to rebel, even if you disagree. But I think a lot of people do build really good relationships with their management and with their coaching staff, and especially the top, of the league, like the top half that are doing pretty well. Think, well, if I go free agent and don't re-sign, then I might have to make this awkward choice where like I have to agree to go to like a bottom 2 team to make the money that I want, and then I'm going to be unhappy there. So I'd rather just re-sign and stay safe and be with the players that are mostly going to be with me and the coaching staff I've already worked with and already trust, because there isn't that much movement in coaching staff. Like I feel like when T1's management changed and they decided to buy up like almost everything, like that's created a bit of like flux for Korea right now.
Sure.
Because they got all the best free agents, and then they got the coach of the World Championship team. But that's pretty rare, right? To see that much change and to see that many new players going into one super team. Generally speaking, you kind of, I think, have a good idea as to what the team is going to look like if you stay, because everybody talks. Players talk to each other. Oh, I'm thinking about leaving. Like, what do you think? They communicate with each other. And I think there is an inherent relationship between the players, the managers, and the coach. And often the head coach is not even really like a strategy coach. He's actually someone who takes care of the team and is manager.
Yes, he's like the ultimate bigger brother in that sense, sure.
Oh, just that I think that also, having the lower turnover in coaching staff is actually, I think, something that also contributes to Korea's success, because coaches are given like more time to fail and like, see,
Yes,
learn from their mistakes, see what they can do with different rosters and all that stuff. Because like, as you guys have said, just because like one coach works with one roster doesn't mean he'll work with another roster. Like, coaches can have different skill sets, can be successful in other environments. It's not as if like being a coach is just like, a linear quantity. Like, yes, if you're a good coach, you should have some adaptability, but you do have to really see like, what they're like in a lot of different environments. And sometimes that can take years. And so I do think that Korea understands that better. I do think like a lot of Western teams will be like, well, I guess we're just going to change our coach because we can, or just because, we didn't win. So see ya. I don't even know why we're making a change, but, we feel like making a change. So there you go.
Or I got higher solo queue rank than him, so I don't trust him. And I've heard so many stories.
I mean, obviously, sometimes you do need, like, I just advocated for a change earlier there with like Gen.G, like, I think they need to make a change to, get a bit of a culture shift and stuff like that. But I do think the coach is not necessarily part of that. I think like coaches, you do need to give them like time I mean, I'm a coach. Maybe I like to argue for career stability, but like again, I do think it helps. I do think it actually does contribute to better performance long term.
In light of the fact that obviously on this episode we've had to talk about all these new rookies and players that are being brought in as subs, etc., that's one area where Korea, in my opinion, actually is still like mad OP compared to Western regions, is that in the Korean mentality, they also, like, maybe you can talk to us a bit, Wolf, because I don't know myself what it's from, but they also have like the craziest fucking like dream life of any pros in the world. Like the guy who will be the sub behind Faker, even in his prime, really believes if he practices and tries his hardest, he might one day replace Faker and be like the star of T1. Like they dude, ones where like any Westerner would just go like, dude, just give it up, like just go like basically. Here's the analogy: if you were an LCS level player, right, and you had the choice, be the backup for Bjergsen when he was at his prime, and, you know, have to pray and hope that everything goes perfect in your career to one day even get in the starting lineup. Or you can be a starter, but for the worst team in LCS. Dude, every Westerner just picks the last one. They go, fuck that, look, I'll just be a starter, I'll play in the league, you know, maybe from there I can prove I'm good, I can parlay it. Koreans, it seems like overwhelmingly, if they like the org and they like the premise of the org, dude, they will go through, like, I've seen players who were just on a bench for 3 years and then later they become a good player for a different team. And you're like, holy shit, you could have been playing the whole time? Like, can you give some thoughts on why this would be? Because on the one hand, I think if you're the top team, obviously it can be an amazing benefit. But for these players, like, to me, it's so alien. Like, again, I can understand the guy. I'd rather just be a starter than a bench player, no matter who the team is, you know?
Yeah, I mean, there are some teams in Korea that are just so iconic that if you get a chance to be a part of that, like, you're so drawn to that, especially as a young player who, like, you rather it's actually almost the same, like, mentality wise to what you were saying about, like, would you rather play behind Bjergsen or would you rather just be like a star player on a bottom team? Would you rather like be on T1 and see what happens as in like wear the T1 badge and be like on the T1 like Namu wiki page, like where it shows you like as an official T1 player, where you wear the jersey and the prestige that comes with that, and be able to tell your family like I play for T1, the team that won 3 world championships? Like, I think like there's, for different reasons, like a lot of prestige that comes with that. Like a Korean player will get a lot of prestige even if he doesn't start because he's part of a huge historied org. Whereas, you know, if you play behind Bjergsen, like, you know, also, like, depending on which org we're talking about, like, you might be on a bit of a meme org that isn't doing that well, even though it's a famous one. Like, I think the respect that, like, T1 garners versus, like, a team like TSM or even Cloud9 is, like, massive because of the region's history as world champions, right? So, like, you know, NA just doesn't quite have that same sort of, like, yes, this is the team I want to play for. Yeah, you might get a lot of fans, but, like, if you're the sub, you're not going to get as many because the focus is going to be on the already existing top players that are there. Whereas, you know, teams like T1 historically, Rocks Tigers, you go into like the past, like KT Rolster as well, when they were a peak team, KT Rolster in StarCraft, T1 in StarCraft, Lunatic High, right? Some of these runaways, some of these extremely prestigious orgs, Seoul Dynasty, so famous that you want to be a part of it almost no matter what. And many players have even taken pay cuts to be a part of those orgs because they really trust in the org and they know that the fame that the org has comes with like a bit of extra draw for how many fans you're going to get. And if you're, you know, if everyone in T1 says that you're doing well and like they say in interviews like, yeah, we're not playing closer, but like he's doing very well in scrims, if you do decide you want to get out, like you're probably still going to have a lot of options. You're not going to walk out as like, oh, they were the sub who never played because he played behind Faker and like how good is he really? You know, people talk and you'll have options when you get out. But I think that like there's a certain prestige that you're chasing if you're, you know, closer, for example. And also, like, let's be real, I mean, closer probably got paid a lot of money. Like T1 has a lot of money to throw around. Like it probably wasn't like, would you like to play behind Faker for like just above minimum salary? It was probably like, we want to offer you a pretty good salary. We're T1, okay. we're famous org, and we'll pay you a lot. So I think he's probably making a decent amount of money. I don't know what his salary is, but I do think there's a lot of orgs in Korea where you feel like the prestige is there. You wouldn't feel that way about Hanwha Life or even DRX, you know, even though they just went to Worlds. You wouldn't feel that same level. T1 has such a history that you feel like, oh man, I better take that offer. And my parents would be so proud, almost like that. It's almost that level. If you're thinking about a team like T1. Okay,
question within that, because like, does that come more from the status of esports within Korea? Because like, I hear sort of as a Westerner, I hear sort of mixed reports on that. Like, oh, Nah, it's more like pro wrestling or something. Like no, 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 no. Like it's actually, a big thing. Like, you can brag to your friends about it. Or does it come from just like there being like a gap between orgs? Like, this org is like down here and like this org is like way up here. And maybe that's like, not as big within the West, because like, obviously like here that doesn't exist. Like, yeah, if you play for, C9 Academy, that doesn't really do that much, that much special for you. Like, it's not like, yeah, you're a C9 player. You know what I mean?
Sure.
Yes.
I mean, I would say to first answer your question about like how big esports is here. I think when Brood War was at its peak, like it was huge and everybody followed it. And like I still sometimes when people like if I get in a taxi with like an older taxi driver and they ask me what I do, they just like, oh, you speak Korean. Well, what do you do? And I tell them like, well, I'm an esports commentator, or we'll even start because sometimes they're like, what? And I like my first follow-up question if they're like, what do you mean? Is do you know StarCraft? And almost every single taxi driver, I'm talking like 65-year-old plus taxi drivers, are like, oh yeah, I know StarCraft, like of course. And they'll say like Im Yo Hwan, like boxer.
They all think like as Box is still playing, basically, even though that's like he's been retired up 15 years or something now. Right?
and it's like being like mentioning Michael Jordan. Obviously, basketball is much more popular, but
sure.
If you ask people if they know League of Legends, especially the older generation, not really. Like.
Right.
It's not televised anymore. It's for the older. There's a huge gap between the older generation and the younger generation because the older generation still watches cable television, right?
Right.
They know the older modern celebrities. They watch like morning talk shows, right? And Faker's appeared on some of these programs, for example. Faker is definitely the most famous player in Korea and in the world, but like you know what I mean. But like if you tell, like, say you're a player and you're like, I got a call from a pro gaming organization. Your mom's like already worried because you're playing so many games. Like, and you keep saying, Mom, I'm really good. Like, I'm actually top 50. She doesn't know what it means. And you go, Mom, I got an offer from T1. SK Telecom T1, the phone company. Like, they want me to wear their clothes. And also, and if she goes and looks them up, like she pulls her smartphone out and looks them up, she's like, oh, that team has 3 world championships. And there's all these pictures of all of them with trophies and like so many fans watching. It's like, okay, you're like, your mom is like, all right, like you can go to tryouts, like we can talk about this show. And that's kind of a thing. Like that's why I thought it was always really important that we had cable TV for OGN. Like we don't have that anymore. Like we don't have esports like on TV. It's on internet television only. Like it's live streamed. I think we lost something really huge for convincing the older generation and parents and grandparents of those players. Like telling them, like, because they knew when StarCraft Brood War was on TV, they knew that's on TV. That's a big deal. And yeah, people hear about Worlds and like Korea's very famous for this. And you could show Faker like on a snow cone, like he's on an ice cream cone at the CU downstairs. But like there's something about that. There's something we lost when we lost cable television. But if you tell your mom like, yo, Gen.G wants to sign me, because like if you think about it, like Gen.G even a more successful org. They went to Worlds last year. Like I feel like there's like a big gap there, right? Even though Gen.G is like a better team right now in the standings. You're attracted to T1 as a young player because you're like, this is the team that did it 3 times. This is a team I can show my parents, and like this is the team that has so many fans. And, like maybe nowadays that's not as much of a draw for T1, but like generally speaking, right? Especially before this season, I think you're still thinking like this team has the most fans. This is where I'm gonna get the most recognition. Hopefully that answered your question.
Yeah, so you are kind of saying it's a bit more about org gap. You think like the difference between the lower and the higher orgs is just like so dramatic.
That's why I also think the point you made is also quite relevant to this season, because that's the other point, isn't it? It's like, yeah, in that scenario, maybe it is worth being a sub for T1 instead of being like a starter on Frederick Brion. Like, like the gap there is ridiculous, isn't it? Whereas the difference is, if I could go be a starter on KT Rolster, there's still enough shine on that name. That's still something. I can still connect myself to the history of all the great KT Rolster players, blah, 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 and history. By the way, should we wrap up with that? Because even though, listen, there's other teams we can talk about. Every year, you have to at least address the fact that KT Rolster still exists in Korea. They still always have the odd player that's half decent, but it does look like they're just doomed to never return at this point in time. Like, what do you think of Abaxial? Do you have any thoughts about KT? Because to me, like I can't hate on them. Like, listen, it was a legendary org, but I don't really give a fuck about watching any of their lineups for the last 2 years. Basically, it's kind of just a done deal for me.
I think Monty's tweet, I will not get excited about KT. I mean, it just seems to always be relevant. Even, what is it? Is it like 6, 7 years old at this point? It just feels like it's always good to retweet that. No, I think, gosh, KT. I don't want to talk about it, but like they have some ability to stay even in the game. They have some ability to like trade, but I think individually they all just have like relatively average laners. Nobody like really stands out. I guess you can make an argument for Thorin, but I don't really see him as like like he's good, but he's not like killer. Like
Yes.
like able to stand with someone like Summit or whatever.
I have the tools, man. I feel like UCal and Doran, that's it. That's all you got. Like if you're KT right now.
Yeah, like UCal's good, but is he the best? Like they just don't have any player you think is like one of the best. They also seem like a really reactive team. Like, I mean, I think in Korea in general, something that's a little troubling is that like, it feels like every fight is like a unplanned double TP fight. I feel like I don't see enough people like, knowing how to like rotate around the map and, sort of create number advantages the hard way. It feels like everything is just like, nah, let's fight where the ADC is. Nah, let's just double TP this, and sort of coin flip it. But like KT is like, the team that has the most of that. Like, everything is just like, oh, they're fighting. Okay, everyone TP in. Let's go. It's not like they're trying to like play, to get a numbers advantage. They just kind of react, stay in the game.
Yeah, I think there's like I personally think Yugal is still very good. I don't think he's as good as Doran. But there's a lot of issues with Hybrid, his champion pool. Like he was so reliant on Samira, and he wasn't even that good at it in the first place, and his positioning had a lot of issues. Now Samira's like patched out of the game. He has problems. Then they took Blank out of the team. They just decided that apparently Blank decided he wanted to go down. That's what the rumor is. That's like the official take, I guess, that most people are saying is true. I don't know if I missed the interview there. I find it hard to believe, but Blank is now on the academy team. They put Gideon in. He is not a great player in his own right yet. Like, and I was starting to get a little bit excited about KT at the beginning of the season. But, in the second round robin, I feel like they consistently just don't understand what they're drafting, and it feels like they are winging it a lot. I mean, those teleport fights you're talking about, I can feel it there too, but I can feel it in their like final pick R5 Aatrox, so they keep giving Doran, throughout the season. Where I'm like, and Doran like sits back in his chair like this every time it happens. As soon as the pick comes through, and I'm like, I don't think he wants to play this.
That's how he gets psyched up for the game.
I don't think he wants to play this one here. I don't think he wants. But yeah, I don't think they're making playoffs. Like straight up, I feel like they're lost, and I think it's going to take time for them to get back to form. But this is not the KT Rolsa of fame. This is not the KT Rolsa you remember.
No, I died in like 2018 that roster, which could have won Worlds, but
Sure.
yeah, scores like last final hurrah. But from the teams that are below them, I would say that I think the most interesting is like probably Sandbox. I like Summit, and I actually like Kroko a lot. I think that guy has potential. You see people like respect his Nidalee a lot. Rest of the team kind of, but at least like and like they're almost a little too much. Like maybe Summit's almost a problem on that team where like support has to roam like topside like level 2, level 3 when. That's not necessarily wrong.
It's pushing out a little bit.
Sure. Yeah. If it works, it works. If it doesn't work, then So maybe Summit's a little too demanding. I know he's been like benched before and stuff like that. So that's a interesting story if you have any back on that. But I think Sandbox is the most interesting. Other players I like from the bottom teams. I think that's I actually like the Brian ADC, Henna or whatever his name is. I think he's got some interesting potential. I don't know. The Nongshim or however you say their name, Nongshin Red Force. Peanut's fun to watch, but like he refuses to play for objectives or like do setup or like help lanes get pushed. He's just more like a chaos player. Like watching Peanut this split, it's sort of like there was a meme about Mike Young in NA. I think it was 2018 where Double F was just on stream like, if you just go to Rift Herald, like, right, like a little bit after it spawns, Mike Young will be there soloing it with no pressure. You just like go there and you kill him every time. I feel like that's Peanut every single time this game. Like he doesn't care about like, the map state. He just like walks to a neutral objective and like, I'll try and solo it. Maybe they'll find me. Maybe they won't. We'll see what happens. He doesn't seem to be able to change. He seems to be very committed to like chaos and coin flipping. But he's fun to watch, if nothing else, even if he refuses to play the game properly.
I mean, his mechanics have always been so nice, aesthetically pleasing to watch. The problem with him is, like, he should have just stayed in LPL. Like, mate, you were made for the LPL. I don't know why he has kept trying to have these years in Korea, because it just never worked out for him. Like, think about even the great Korean junglers. They're all fucking brain junglers, mate. They're not people just doing ganks, are they? Like that's what the LPL is. In fact, they even have half a dozen Koreans who just do that. They just play fucking Lee Sin and just go balls deep. Like, that's your game. Just go play there. Because like, as you kind of allude to there, mate, I don't have a problem when Peanut's on a bad team. Just, you know what, pop off, my dude. Just have a good game. You just do whatever you need to. I only get bothered if he's supposed to be on a good team, you know. Then it's like, right, now you have to play League of Legends, mate. That's going to be hard, you know.
Right. You can watch him for fun as opposed to like, trying to analyze what he's doing. Just like,
yeah.
Get some popcorn, you know.
Yeah, but it's like when I was saying earlier about Khan. I'm not a Khan hater. Like, if Khan's playing some bad team and he has a fucking Camille, I'm all in. I can't wait for this game. My point is, if I imagine myself as like the support player on Khan's team, now I might have some issues with how he plays the game. I might not enjoy some of these matchups as much, you know. At least in the past, I will give him credit. This year he does look a lot better. This video was kindly supported by Bobby, Lager15, Pronogo, Zachary Carter, Andrew, Alexander Rao, Andreas Kroknes, Animosity, Dean Tanglis, ErikHillestad, Hades, Jdubs, Jensen Goh, Tobias Bernasconi, Zyrathenia, Zoomba, and as always, a special thanks goes out to Jerky's Minion. Do you want to suggest a topic or a guest for my shows? Do you want to ask a question for my monthly video AMA? Want teasers for who's coming up on my content? Or do you even want to take part in one of those exclusive discussions with me about esports? If so, put your money where your mouth is and join the Skilluminati today via the Patreon link in the description box below.